Okay, right now, it feels like the world's attention is just completely locked on the Middle East. Specifically, this really intense, escalating conflict between Israel and Iran.
Yeah,
Missiles are flying, cities getting targeted, key facilities hit. It really feels like we're watching something major unfold.
absolutely. I mean, the speed of developments just in the last few days has been
Yeah.
pretty extraordinary. The whole region is on edge, and you can feel the global ripples too.
And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. You've gathered a whole stack of sources for us, reports from AP, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, CNN, Fox News, basically covering that critical window around June 15th to 17th, 2025.
That's right.
So, our mission here really is to unpack what these sources are telling us, understand the recent events, the targets, the impacts they report, get a handle on the different viewpoints in these reports, and then look at the bigger picture, the international side of things,
Yeah.
all based on this material.
Think of us as guides, sort of navigating through the raw info from these different news outlets, trying to give you a clearer source-based picture of what's being reported. And the situation, according to these accounts, it says rapid escalation right after Israel launched Operation Rising Lion.
Okay, let's jump right into that then. This immediate escalation. What do the sources say about how things kicked off? June 15th to 17th, where did it start?
So, according to the reporting we've got, it began with Israel launching this Operation Rising Lion.
Okay.
Sources like Fox News state Israel's reported aim was Iran's nuclear and missile infrastructure. And crucially, they also note the operation reportedly killed top Iranian military leaders and nuclear scientists.
Right. And how did Iran respond? What do the reports say about their reaction to that Israeli offensive?
Well, the sources describe Iran hitting back with waves of missile and drone attacks towards Israel. Al Jazeera, CNN, Fox News, they all specifically mention cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa being targeted.
And the human cost. It's vital we look at that. What do the sources report about casualties during this initial phase on both sides?
Yeah, and this is where you really see the value of comparing sources, because the reported human cost looks drastically different depending on whose figures you're reading.
How so?
Well, AP and Fox News, they report the Israeli Magen David Adom Emergency Service stating at least 8 killed and over 100 hospitalized in Israel from those Iranian attacks.
Okay, 8 and 100 plus.
But then, on the Iranian side, Fox News and CNN cite Iran's Ministry of Health reporting much higher numbers, at least 224 killed and almost 1,300 hospitalized in Iran since Israel's offensive began. And they state the vast majority were civilians.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is, and it's really vital to remember, as these sources point out, these are the figures provided by each side. We're reporting what they reported.
Absolutely. Understanding the source of the numbers is critical. And this wasn't just like a single exchange, right? These reports suggest it went on for days.
Yeah, exactly. The reporting, like in Fox News, really highlights this wasn't a one-off. The escalation kept going over several days. Both sides were conducting strikes throughout that period.
Okay, so with that initial picture set, let's dig into the specifics. The targets reportedly hit, the strategic impacts described in these sources. Maybe start with the Israeli strikes on Iran. There seems to be a lot of focus on nuclear targets.
There certainly is, yeah. The Natanz nuclear enrichment facility comes up again and again in several sources. CNN, the AP timeline,
Right.
and the AP timeline gives some useful history on Natanz. It was revealed back in '02.
Weird.
Then the Stuxnet virus hit it in 2010 of the big cyber attack.
I remember that.
Yeah, then a mysterious explosion in July 2020, another cyber attack, April 21. I mean, this history suggests it's been a persistent target, maybe showing its vulnerability.
Hmm.
And after these recent strikes, AP also reports the UN nuclear agency warning about possible contamination inside the site. Interestingly, CNN adds that Iran claims they recently shot down an Israeli drone near Natanz.
That place definitely has a history based on that timeline.
Yeah.
What about other key nuclear sites? Any others mentioned?
Yeah, CNN specifically draws a contrast between Natanz and the Fordo facility.
Fordo, okay.
That one's described in the sources like heavily fortified. And reportedly, it was untouched by these recent Israeli strikes. The CNN report notes that actually damaging Fordo would apparently require specific U.S. capability. So it presents a totally different level of challenge compared to Natanz.
Right. So hitting Fordo seems much harder strategically based on these accounts. Beyond the nuclear aspect, what other kinds of infrastructure did Israel reportedly target in Iran?
Fox News gives quite a bit of detail, apparently based on satellite images. It mentions strikes on missile and electronics facilities in Shiraz, showing fires, damaged buildings, even equipment that looked like it had been moved.
Oh.
The Bid Khaneh missile facility also reportedly hit, multiple buildings destroyed, vehicles scattered. A Shiran oil depot was struck fire and smoke visible in the images there too. And Fox News also reports Israel hitting the Quds Force headquarters in Tehran. Israel apparently stated it was used for planning terrorist acts.
That sounds like a pretty wide range of targets. Did Israel release any overall numbers for Operation Rising Lion?
They did, yeah.
Yeah.
Fox News reports Israel saying they hit over 170 targets and 720 military infrastructure components in just 3 days, all part of the operation, focusing on nuclear project infrastructure, but also military and energy sites.
And sadly, the reports also mention key figures being killed.
That's right. Fox News specifically highlights the reported death of Ali Shamkhani. He was a former head of the Supreme National Security Council, a top advisor to Khamenei. The source says he was killed in an airstrike in Tehran.
Okay, let's switch sides now. What did the sources say about Iran's targets? What were they hitting in Israel?
Multiple sources describe missiles, quote, raining down on central Israel. Fox News and Al Jazeera specifically mentioned Tel Aviv and Haifa being hit. Air defense systems like Iron Dome were apparently intercepting some, but Fox News does report damage to buildings.
Was energy infrastructure targeted by Iran as well?
Yes. CNN details an attack on the Haifa oil refinery, the one known as Bazan.
Right.
This attack reportedly damaged a power plant that the group uses and forced facilities to shut down. CNN also reports that, tragically, 3 employees were killed in that specific attack.
And there's also a report of a very symbolic strike, too, isn't there?
Absolutely. Al Jazeera and CNN both describe a strike on the headquarters of Iran's state broadcaster, IRIB, in Tehran.
In Tehran?
Yeah. And what makes it really striking is that it reportedly happened during a live broadcast. Al Jazeera even includes an account from an anchor, Sahar Amami, describing the blast, the smoke, her having to flee the studio right in the middle of the broadcast.
Wow, hitting a live broadcast. What was the justification given for that attack by either side, according to these reports?
Well, Iran condemned it, called it a war crime. Iran's foreign ministry, according to Al Jazeera, called Israel the #1 killer of journalists and media people.
Strong words.
Very. Israel, on the other hand, as reported by Al Jazeera and CNN, claimed the center was actually being used by armed forces, just under civilian cover, to promote military operations and spread anti-Israel propaganda. Al Jazeera also notes that Iran then issued an evacuation warning for Israeli news channels, N12 and N14, in response.
Okay, so we've covered the immediate events, the reported targets. Let's pivot now to the differing narratives, how each side is framing this. Clearly, they're justifying their actions, but the way they talk about it varies. How does Iran frame its strikes based on the sources?
The Guardian reports on Iran's statement to the UN Security Council. They describe their strikes as self-defense and proportionate defensive operations directed exclusively at military objectives. And like we just said, Al Jazeera reports that strong language from the Foreign Ministry about the IRB strike.
Right. Self-defense, military objectives. And Israel's position, what are their stated intentions or goals according to these reports?
Well, The Guardian reports Israel's foreign minister saying the operation is unfinished and that Israel will act to complete it.
Unfinished.
Yeah. And Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements are quoted in both The Guardian and Fox News. He reportedly said the Israeli strikes have set Iran's nuclear program back a very, very long time. He also added he would not be surprised if the attacks led to the toppling of the Iranian government.
Toppling the government.
And even reportedly said that killing Khamenei would end it. Fox News also includes a former IDF intelligence chief suggesting they should target, quote, regime targets beyond the military level, calling it the head of the snake.
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, Fox News reports the Israeli UN ambassador arguing that Israel is basically doing the dirty work for democracies by confronting Iran's nuclear and missile threat, and making the case that Iran targets cities while Israel targets military bases and nuclear reactors.
Okay, this brings us to maybe the most significant insight you get when you compare these sources. This stark contrast in intelligence assessments about Iran's nuclear program. There are clearly very different views being reported.
Absolutely. Yeah, CNN specifically digs into this discrepancy. It highlights claims from Israeli officials and also Donald Trump that Iran was very close or even on the verge of a nuclear weapon when Israel struck.
Right.
But that's contrasted sharply with U.S. intelligence assessments, also reported by CNN, which apparently stated Iran was not actively pursuing a weapon at that time. And they estimated Iran was maybe up to 3 years away from being able to actually produce and deliver one.
3 years away versus on the verge. And what impact did U.S. intelligence reportedly think the Israeli strikes would actually have on that timeline?
So CNN reports that, according to these U.S. intelligence officials, the strikes might only set the program back by months, not years, and certainly not the very, very long time claimed by others.
That is a massive gap in assessment, just fundamentally different views reported by these sources. What about the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency? What's their reported take?
CNN mentions an IAEA report stating that, yes, Iran has enough enriched uranium for potentially 9 bombs, but importantly, it still needs a delivery system.
Okay.
And the CNN report also raises this crucial concern, that the very act of these strikes might actually push Iran to pursue weaponization if it wasn't already doing so. Kind of an unintended consequence.
So depending on which intelligence assessment you focus on from these reports, the justification for the strikes and their potential long-term impact look completely different. It really highlights how complex it is to get a clear picture from these varying reports.
Precisely. Yeah, it's a critical point where the information presented by these sources really diverges.
Let's widen the lens now. Look at the international reactions, the diplomatic moves reported during this intense period. What were global leaders saying or doing?
Well, the G7 summit was happening in Canada. And according to AP and The Guardian, it was heavily focused on de-escalation, trade, and, the ongoing wars, particularly this one. The Guardian mentions a draft joint statement that called for de-escalation, but also said Israel has the right to defend itself.
And what was Donald Trump's reported reaction to that particular G7 statement?
The Guardian and CNN report he refused to sign that draft. CNN quotes him saying he wanted a real end, not just a ceasefire, and claiming something much bigger was in the works.
A real end. What about other major powers? China, Russia.
Yeah, CNN reports China stating it was deeply concerned and willing to play a constructive role. The Guardian reports Russia's position was that Iran was exercising self-defense and that they were discussing the crisis with the U.S. while keeping lines open with both sides.
And the U.S. posture beyond Trump's statements, any military movements reported?
Yes, The Guardian reports the U.S. relocated refueling aircraft to Europe and sent the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier to the Middle East, sort of positioning for potential military options. However, Fox News reports Trump saying the U.S. could get involved, but also stating the U.S. had nothing to do with Israel's initial attack. He reportedly gave a strong warning to Iran any attack against the U.S. met with full strength and might. But then, almost in the same breath, according to Fox, urged Israel and Iran to make a deal.
A bit of a mixed message there.
Seems like it. And U.S. embassies in the region were issuing warnings too. Fox News reports the embassy in Israel told government employees to shelter in place, and the embassy in Baghdad warned citizens about large gatherings due to increased threats. The Guardian also notes Senator Tim Kaine introduced legislation trying to restrict Trump's war powers in this context.
So a mix of military moves, strong warnings, but also calls for a deal from the U.S., according to these reports. Were there regional diplomatic efforts happening alongside all this?
CNN reports that Iran was actually seeking talks with the U.S. and Israel, but mediated by Gulf states, specifically Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Qatar was reportedly talking with the U.S. daily. Yeah, and CNN also highlights a joint statement from 20 Arab and Muslim countries. They condemned the Israeli attacks, called for de-escalation, diplomacy, and, notably, called for a Middle East free of nuclear weapons, really emphasizing diplomacy over military force.
This is clearly a crisis hitting on so many levels. Let's look at the wider impacts, future concerns mentioned in the sources. Beyond the military stuff, how were civilians affected?
CNN includes some really harrowing descriptions. Tehran residents apparently fleeing the city. Journeys that normally take 3 hours were stretching to 14 hours.
14 hours.
Yeah, people seeking refuge in places like Mazandaran province. Local officials there were preparing for the influx, keeping bakeries open 24 hours, things like that. CNN also mentions Donald Trump reportedly warning Iranians to immediately evacuate Tehran.
It's easy to get lost in the strategy, but those details really bring home the human impact. The Guardian also flagged a concern that world attention might be shifting away from Gaza.
Yes, that point is explicitly made in the Guardian report, framing this new conflict against the backdrop of the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, where aid distribution, communication blackouts were already making things incredibly tough for aid workers.
Right. Beyond the human cost, what about economic repercussions? What did the sources report?
Well, the G7 leaders were reportedly focused on safeguarding market stability, especially energy markets, according to The Guardian.
Makes sense.
And CNN discusses the potential impact of strikes on energy facilities. It specifically mentions the shared South Pars gas field that's between Iran and Qatar. And there was a warning reported from a Gulf official about that specific threat to global energy security and also U.S. and regional interests.
Okay, that's a specific concern.
And the critical importance of the Strait of Hormuz is also highlighted in CNN. It's described as this major choke point. About a third of the world's seaborne oil trade, 20% of natural gas goes through there.
Huge number.
Yeah. So disruption there, according to CNN, could cause oil prices to just surge and have a really significant impact on the global economy. That's very clear, tangible global risk potentially coming out of this regional conflict.
Absolutely. Okay, looking ahead then, based on these reports from mid-June, what did the sources suggest about the immediate prospects for more escalation? Was anyone signaling things might cool down?
Not really, based on these accounts. As we mentioned earlier, Israel's foreign minister is quoted in The Guardian saying the operation is unfinished.
Right.
And from the Iranian side, CNN reports an Iranian military commander warning of a new wave of fierce attacks using new and advanced weapons that would intensify in the coming hours, potentially including long-range drones.
So based on these specific sources from that time frame, neither side was really signaling an immediate end to the fighting.
That's the picture presented in these reports, yes. It looked set to continue, at least in the short term.
Well, this deep dive has definitely helped us unpack the key information from the reports you brought. It paints a picture of this intense exchange of strikes, outlines those differing claims and justifications, and really highlights the multiple layers of impact from, civilian lives and humanitarian issues right through to global energy markets.
Yeah, we've tried to pull out the critical nuggets directly from those accounts, AP, Guardian, Al Jazeera, CNN, Fox News, covering those specific dates, June 15th to 17th. Just to help you get a better handle on the complexity of this situation as it was being reported then.
So as you, the listener, consider everything we've just discussed, think about those different perspectives presented in the sources and the potential consequences of this escalation regionally, globally. It's a real reminder of how fast things can change and how tough it is to get a complete picture from different reports, especially in the heat of the moment.
And maybe something to mull over as you process all this. How might those starkly conflicting intelligence assessments on Iran's nuclear program, whether it's reported as very close to a weapon or years away, whether the strike set it back months or that very, very long time, how might that discrepancy influence future actions by either side or by other international players mentioned in these sources? And given the really entrenched positions we've seen reported, what could Donald Trump's idea of a real end to this conflict even look like?